Hey, team players. Today we're going to be breaking down the Cleveland Browns and what they look like post-draft and what to look forward with for their season, where are spots that they can be optimistic about, and really what is the direction of this team. So when we look at Cleveland, it all now and basically forever is going to hinge upon Watson. Will Watson return to what he was when he wanted to play football in Houston? And was the last 6 weeks last year what the Browns actually bought, or was that just knocking off 18 months worth of risk? Personally, I'm very unoptimistic about this situation here because you quit working for 2 years and you mentally check out. It's very hard to return to what you were. And Cleveland, to their credit, is trying to do every single thing they can to give him receiver-based weapons. Obviously, they are in a credible situation of cap problems. The amount of money they give him to Watson, the amount of money they're giving to Myles Garrett, and they're not getting the production that money would indicate from either one of them. No high draft picks. They're in a very tight spot in basically a must-win situation now, given the cap restrictions moving forward. So the draft is incredibly important and vital for the Cleveland Browns moving forward, possibly more so than any other team, given the cap situation that they're living in. And when we look at what they did with this draft, there are some pieces where I'm like, yeah, makes a lot of sense, very good. And some of them that were like, ooh, you missed, bro. And that's how I really feel about looking at the Cleveland Browns draft overall. When we start with the Tillman coming out of Tennessee, downfield guy, lots of speed, basically throw it deep, let Watson hit him. You need someone who's going to stretch the field if you're going to have a good running game. And Bob, you have watched DFS with me through this lens more than anyone else. Donovan Peoples-Jones is not the people's answer. He gives you 2 games a year, and that's about it. And he's not a reliable piece. But because he went to Michigan, and the Cleveland Browns love the Big Ten possibly more than any other team loves a specific conference in the league, it really, really limits them. But I do believe Tillman, very quality, good pickup. I believe that Jones, the left tackle, or I guess he'll play right tackle in the NFL from Ohio State, will grade out to be very effective. And when you're a team that needs to protect and run the ball, which every team does, the offensive line matters a lot. I think Jones in the 4th round is one of the absolute best 4th round steals of this draft. Again, you got to keep that with the grain of salt. It's the 4th round. So it's not like we're stealing someone who fell in the 1st. It's still 4th round talent. And for the long run, Chuck, they also took Ohio State center, who ESPN had rated as the 4th best center in this draft, and they got him in the 6th round. So those are picks I really like from the Cleveland Browns. Unfortunately, there's 4 other picks that needed to hit, and Cleveland needs to hit on basically all their picks, that I'm not seeing a lot of optimism of saying, yes, this is going to be a winner, starting with the fact that Cleveland could not stop the run to save their lives last year.
Yeah.
Not even a little bit. And the D tackle from Baylor that they got, how do you say that? IKA, Bob. How do you say that?
I don't know, like Ayaka?
Yeah, something like that. No, first off, you can't fix it with just one D lineman. And also, he's 335. He's a little bit undersized in terms of height to be in there, only at 6'3". You prefer those guys to be north of 6'5" or higher. And the bottom line is big body, big man, hard to move, but not getting a lot of off the ball play, not getting off his blocks incredibly well. And at the end of the day, just run away from him because he ain't going to catch it. So I look at the Cleveland Browns overall, and that's where I'm at, Bob. And I'm trying not to be super pessimistic about the Browns, but I got a strong feeling that these guys have one of the 4 worst rosters in the AFC, maybe in the NFL.
So I've been excited about the Cleveland Browns at some points in time in my life, I guess. And now's not one of them. They put together a fairly good defense a couple years ago, if I'm remembering correctly, and that like invigorated the city. They were like, "Wow, our team is contending. Our team is good." And then personnel decisions happen, and they decide that they're going to go after Deshaun Watson. Now, when I said in our discussion about both the Ravens and the Bengals, I said that there is no quarterback in this division that I would be worried about. I stand by that statement. You only play Burrow twice a year. And when, the Bengals don't have to worry about Joe Burrow because Joe Burrow's on their team. And so the Ravens, they're not built to protect themselves against Joe Burrow, and neither are the Cleveland Browns. Now, there are a lot of teams in the league that build their team to beat their division rivals. There are a lot of teams that the management decides, we're going to beat these teams no matter what, so that my fans come Sunday, week 7, still come to the game because that division game still matters. That division game means something to us. Now, the Cleveland Browns did minimal effort to put into the needs that they should have addressed. Now,
well, actually, Bob, let me correct myself here. Their 2 biggest offseason signings, because I read these backwards the first time, was Tomlinson from Minnesota. I apologize. I read this backwards when I was looking at the report beforehand.
Don't worry about it.
Not exactly a world beater, but
not going to make a difference what I'm about to say.
Fair enough.
When you are constructing this team and you're saying to yourself, okay, I did pretty decent with Jacoby Brissett last year, but my problem was my defense. And then the first pick you take out of the gate is a wide receiver when you also just traded for or got Elijah Moore. It doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, Tillman's a dog. I love Tillman. But the issue is as an organization, and we said this about the Ravens too, when you put a lot of effort into to riding the line and towing the line to make both sides of the ball good in a draft, over time, you're eventually going to have that draft capital, and hopefully you did your work the right way, and your players are going to grow. Now, oftentimes now, though, some of those players don't grow. And when you're relying on 7th-round guys to show up for you on a day-to-day basis instead of being a plug-and-play backup on days where your starter gets hurt, there are some guys that can't ever grow into a starter. And they're always going to be a backup, but they'll be a good backup for like a couple of snaps or maybe a game or two. But if you expose them to enough time over their lifespan in the league, that if you're putting out perennial backups and you're assuming that they're going to be everyday starters, that just can't happen, particularly when we're looking at what the Steelers can do in their pass rush. When we're looking at the Bengals hopefully improving their pass rush. When we look at the Ravens, like I said before, I don't think the Ravens got any better, but Roquan Smith is a dog, and you've got to be careful with him. And so the problem with logistically, all the AFC North teams has been their offensive line in quite the last few years. And we've seen how that's worked out as teams have transitioned away from, for some reason or another, getting healthy and keeping healthy offensive lineman players. And that's not just the Cleveland Browns, but it is, an epidemic throughout the AFC North. But back to the Browns here is that one of the biggest things that they needed to do was put somebody opposite Myles Garrett. Jadeveon Clowney didn't work out the way that Cleveland wanted to.
Well, they
Garrett
signed, I never say his name right.
I know who you're saying.
Orakakopo.
And that's good, but we all know that edge rushers and guys that get after the ball need to be spelled. And you need to have a large amount of them on your team, i.e.
Well, he's also a guy who only has 10 career sacks in 4 years.
But i.e. not what the Steelers did last year when TJ Watt went down and their team production went down into the shitter. When you think about take, for example, what the Philadelphia Eagles are doing. It's not a fair example, but I'm going to use it.
Well, the best in the
I'm
league.
going to use it anyway. You understand that the league is built around rushing the passer. That is what you put your bank into. That's what you're building. And they have a plethora. So if Cox get hurt or if somebody else gets hurt on that line, they have the opportunity to replace them with an equal caliber, maybe a little bit less. But when you go from Myles Garrett to the next guy up, that next guy up isn't even in the same sentence as Myles Garrett. And Myles Garrett has even fallen off just a little bit. But even then, he's not in the same sentence as Myles Garrett. And you can look at this too with, like I said, with the Steelers. The Steelers with TJ Watt, amazing generational talent. When TJ Watt got hurt, you didn't even want to watch the game. You felt an obligation if you're a Steelers fan that you had to, but you didn't even want to watch it because it was such a disaster to watch. And the Cleveland Browns did not do enough, in my mind at least. Now, they tried. And that's the best thing that we can say about Cleveland in this situation is they tried. Because we don't know what this talent is going to do on a team together. But at this moment in time, you can say that they tried more than the Ravens did to address the needs that they needed. But but Cleveland, I would dare say,
Cleveland tried to buy B-level talent and turn into A-level talent, maybe even C-level talent.
But I would dare say, if I'm looking at the Cleveland Browns, and you said it's not a very good team and it might be one of the worst rosters in football, that's saying a lot. But I do like Nick Chubb. And I think that with at least a decent running game, if Deshaun Watson can find himself this season, because just like the Ravens, and I'm comparing them a lot, just like the Ravens, that team will go the way the quarterback goes. If Deshaun Watson does really, really well, you could see the Cleveland Browns fighting to be a team at 500. If you see him falling off, there's no rescue for this team because their defense is not built. And I'm going to leave it at that. It's not built.
Yeah,
and so you can't protect yourself against anything when you were one of the worst teams against the rush last year. And because you are one of the worst teams against the rush, people didn't decide to pass it on you. And so your back end basically is non-existent. We don't know what they're going to do over the whole season because they weren't challenged. And so, now with Baltimore getting Zay Flowers, that might challenge them a little bit more. When you have Cincinnati doing everything that they do, that might challenge them more. When you have another year of Kenny Pickett, maybe, just maybe, that will challenge the secondary a little bit more. That now, now that Cleveland will have to play a full game on defense, it could be even worse. But I think that they might be, if Deshaun Watson gets better this year and not worse, I think they might end up getting a couple. I think they might end up challenging Baltimore a little bit. But I still think that if we rank these as the ones that we've talked about so far out of drafts, Bengals are the A tier for me. Cleveland's farting around at like C, and Baltimore's at D. I don't think they did enough.
It's hard to fight that, and just to kind of do one little recap here with this team, and I guess it's a little bit of a pushback. His entire time as a pro, Chubb has always been spelled by a quality number 2, and they have been a run-focused team. Cleveland has already said this offseason that they want to go more 3 wide and become much more of a passing team, and they don't have an adequate running back to spell Chubb anymore. So when we look at this overall, when we looked at the Cleveland Browns under Baker, we knew their strength was run the ball and basically try to own the clock so much that you can't score enough to beat us. That was essentially their game plan, and hopefully Baker didn't blow it. Mm-hmm. With Watson, they're basically trying to say they're caught. They're not going all in to the Cincinnati model of saying we're just going to outscore everyone, in part because they don't have the resources to get the receivers to do that. Nor are they able to go all in to, say, the Pittsburgh model and say, we're just going to never let anyone score on us. And because they're trying to play both sides with watered-down assets, all they're doing is losing ground everywhere. And this entire potential turns around, though, if Watson ends up becoming a top 5 quarterback. I just fear it's more likely that Watson becomes Blake Bortles and being the best garbage time quarterback of the NFL.
Yeah, and I'm not willing to go that far yet. But we saw what the Cleveland Browns did with Jacoby Brissett. What was their record last year? Did they get like 6 wins? So you saw what Jacoby Brissett took this team to, 6 wins. That means that Deshaun Watson is going to have to play better with arguably not better talent. So,
offensively, this team is taking a step backwards.
This is why I bring this up, because it's important to note when we think about personnel changes is that Jacoby Brissett's not a world beater. And yes, Cleveland got lucky in a lot of situations, but they accumulated 6 wins last year, which for Cleveland isn't awful. Now, Deshaun Watson, like I said, is going to have to be better than 6 wins. But historically speaking, we have not really ever seen Deshaun Watson. Now, they made the playoffs before, Houston, at one point in time with him. Now, is he worth the same value that Lamar Jackson is when they play well? And I don't think that's the case. And so you've got to look at the other side of the ball here. And this is why, I've judged Baltimore harshly on this, but I would be more susceptible to say that I would be more scared of playing Baltimore's defense than I would be against Cleveland's defense, despite the little upgrades that Cleveland has done. And as much as I dogged Baltimore of not going after the right defenses, I would much rather play Cleveland's defense, because I saw last year what they did, and they really sucked. And there was, they lost games.
You should never lose to a rookie quarterback.
Jacoby Brissett was trying his best to win games, and the Cleveland Browns defense was trying its best to lose those games for Jacoby Brissett. The Cleveland Browns arguably should have, if they would have had even a little bit of a decent defense, maybe let's say Chargers or Packers style defense,
they would have been on the verge of the playoffs.
They would have been on the verge of the playoffs. And that's why I say that I'm not totally unsold on Cleveland, but if Deshaun Watson can't play better than Jacoby Brissett did last year, and if that defense plays like it did last year, this team will be exactly the same or worse. And talking about them is a moot point, because they're not making it to the playoffs.
But they're also not bad enough to get the first pick overall.
Exactly.
Houston.
So they're still in the middle of the road. And, they graded. So on the first day of the draft, a lot of people were like, oh, they graded a C, because essentially their first round pick was Deshaun Watson.
Well, it's 1/5 of Deshaun Watson.
Right. And so you've got to look, and Deshaun Watson hasn't done anything yet to say, hey, I'm excited about this. But also he hasn't done worse than, let's say, a team that might have taken Will Levis in the first round. He hasn't done worse than Anthony Richardson might do at this point in the season. So I'm willing to suspend disbelief, because I don't know what Deshaun Watson is going to get. And I'm not willing to suspend disbelief on Lamar Jackson. And that's why I'm judging these two teams in this way. I'm not willing to suspend disbelief on Lamar Jackson because I know what his quality is. I know when he's playing.
As much as for those who watch the Baltimore episode will see, I have problems with the way Lamar Jackson plays. I have problems with his health and the way when he wants to play. But he has still never fully quit on his team and essentially walked away from the game for 2.5 years.
And Deshaun Watson has.
Deshaun Watson has, and there's no indication that there's anything aside from the paycheck that's bringing him back. I believe Lamar Jackson loves football. He loves running around making you look bad. I think that's his favorite thing in the world.
That's his favorite thing in the world.
I don't think that's true with Watson. Not anymore.
I would agree with that statement. I would agree that, that I would rather have Lamar than Deshaun. They're not even close in my book. Not even close. And, depending on the situation, we're going to see maybe, like I said, maybe the Browns competing for a playoff spot, but I would more so ticket in the Bengals and the Ravens out of the 3 teams that we've talked about so far from the AFC North. I would ticket those 2 teams of having a better playoff chance than the Cleveland Browns, with the Bengals guaranteeing a playoff chance, and the Ravens being right outside that.
We'll dive into that in the AFC North conclusion show tomorrow. But this is just one funny point I want to point out here. I agree with you in terms of on the field, I'd rather have Lamar over Watson. But when it comes time to do our fantasy talks all summer long, I will be the opposite. I will want Watson. I want those garbage time points, baby.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what the Cleveland Browns are for.